This is the things that bother me, the place where we don't dress things up, we don't soften the edges, and we don't pretend everything's fine when it clearly isn't. This is where we say the stuff people are already thinking.
But don't always say out loud.
Because, let's be honest, there's a lot going on right now that doesn't sit right. Things that feel off. Things that don't add up. And the more you look at it, the harder it is to ignore. That's what this is about. Not noise. Not distractions. Not picking sides like it's some kind of game. This is about looking straight at the problem, without filters, without spin, and without pretending it's something it's not. If that makes people uncomfortable,
good.
That usually means we're getting close to something real. Episode 2, Truth became optional. Now, let's talk about what might be the biggest problem nobody wants to admit.
Truth.
Or more accurately, the fact that it doesn't seem to matter anymore. We've hit a point where people aren't just disagreeing about opinions. They're disagreeing about reality itself. Same situation, same facts, same evidence, and somehow, completely different conclusions that don't even come close to lining up. That's not normal. That's not just division. That's something deeper. Because once truth becomes optional, once people start treating it like something you can pick and choose based on how it makes you feel, everything built on it starts to break down. Trust disappears. Accountability disappears. And eventually, understanding disappears. Now you've got a system where people aren't even arguing from the same starting point anymore. There's no common ground because there's no shared version of what's real. And once that's gone, you're not having conversations anymore. You're having collisions. That's what we're getting into today. Because this isn't just frustrating, it's dangerous. And the worst part? Most people don't even realize how far it's gone. So let's break it down. America. The damage is permanent. Episode 2. Truth became optional. The silent collapse of reality. It didn't fall apart the way people expected. No sirens. No singular event. No unmistakable moment where everyone stopped and said, "That's it. Something just broke." If it had happened that way, people might have reacted. They might have resisted. They might have tried to hold the line. But that's not how this works. This kind of collapse is quiet. It moves underneath everything. It reshapes the foundation while people are still arguing about the walls. And by the time anyone looks down, the ground is already gone. That's what happened to truth. It didn't get attacked head-on. It got worn down piece by piece until it lost its authority, until it became optional. And once that shift happened, everything built on it, every system, every institution, every assumption about how reality works started to drift. Now you're not dealing with disagreement. You're dealing with disconnection from reality itself. People aren't arguing over facts anymore. They're arguing over whether facts even matter. Over whether reality is fixed or flexible. Over whether truth is something you discover.
Or something you decide.
And once that question is up for debate, the system is already compromised. Because without a fixed point, without something that doesn't move, nothing else holds. What you're watching now isn't dysfunction. It's structural failure. And it doesn't correct itself. 1. Truth wasn't destroyed. It was traded away. Truth didn't collapse under pressure. It was traded away for comfort, identity, and control. It became a liability in a culture that rewards certainty over accuracy and confidence over correctness. Admitting uncertainty started to look like weakness. Being right became less important than feeling right. So people made a trade. They gave up the burden of verification for the ease of affirmation. They stopped asking hard questions because hard questions don't always lead to comfortable answers. And over time, that trade became normalized. Now, truth isn't something you submit to, it's something you negotiate with. And negotiation implies leverage, which means the people with the loudest voices, the biggest platforms, or the strongest emotional pull don't just influence perception. They shape reality for entire segments of the population. That's not a distortion. That's a replacement system. 2. Reality fractured into isolated worlds. The country didn't split geographically, it split perceptually. Multiple realities now exist side by side, each one internally consistent, each one reinforced, each one sealed off from the others. People aren't just disagreeing about interpretation, they're starting from entirely different sets of facts. That creates a condition where dialogue becomes impossible. You can't resolve differences when the baseline itself is contested. Evidence doesn't bridge the gap, it deepens it. Because evidence only has value inside the reality that accepts it. Outside of that, it's meaningless. This isn't polarization, it's parallel existence. And once those tracks are laid, they don't merge again without force. And force introduces a whole different level of instability. 3. Information became an engineered weapon. Information is no longer neutral. It's constructed, optimized, and deployed with intent. The goal isn't clarity, it's impact. Reaction. Control over perception in real time. That means truth has to compete with content specifically designed to outperform it.
And truth is slow.
It requires context, nuance, verification. Engineered narratives don't. They're faster, sharper, more emotionally charged, easier to consume and easier to spread. So they win, not because they're accurate, but because they're efficient. What you're left with is an environment where the most effective version of a story dominates, not the most truthful one. That's not misinformation as a side effect. That's misinformation as infrastructure. 4. Institutional trust collapsed without replacement. Institutions lost credibility, and in many cases, they earned that loss. But when they fell, nothing credible replaced them. There was no transition to better systems, just a vacuum filled by unverified sources, fragmented authorities, and self-appointed experts. That vacuum is unstable by definition, because authority without accountability isn't authority, it's influence. And influence shifts constantly. It's driven by attention, not accuracy, popularity, not reliability. Now, instead of a flawed centralized system, you have a chaotic decentralized one where standards vary wildly, or don't exist at all. And in that environment, truth doesn't just get challenged, it gets drowned out. 5. Social media industrialized distortion. Social media didn't just accelerate this, it scaled it. It turned individual bias into collective momentum. It created systems where millions of people could reinforce the same distortion simultaneously, giving it the appearance of legitimacy through sheer volume. The algorithm doesn't filter for truth. It filters for engagement. And engagement is driven by emotion, usually negative. Anger spreads faster than accuracy. Fear travels further than facts. Certainty outperforms nuance every time. So the system evolves toward distortion naturally. Not because anyone necessarily designed it that way from the start, but because that's what the incentives demand. Now distortion isn't an anomaly. It's the dominant output. 6. Belief systems became non-negotiable. Beliefs used to be influenced by evidence. Now they're insulated from it. They've become tied to identity, and once that happens, changing a belief isn't just intellectual, it's personal. It feels like a loss, an admission, even a threat. So people defend beliefs regardless of evidence because the cost of changing them is too high. That creates rigidity. And rigid systems don't adapt. They fracture. Because when two rigid belief systems collide, neither one bends. They just push harder. And eventually something gives, but it's not the belief. It's the structure, holding everything together. 7. Accountability became a casualty of perception control. Accountability depends on shared reality. You can't hold someone responsible if you can't agree on what they did or whether it even happened. That's the loophole. And it's being used. Every action can be reframed. Every failure can be reinterpreted. Every consequence can be spun into something else entirely. There's always another version of events available, ready to be deployed, ready to be believed. That makes accountability optional. And once accountability becomes optional, behavior shifts fast. Limits disappear, because consequences only matter if they're recognized. 8. Education became another battleground. Education used to serve as a stabilizer, a place where facts could be established, debated, and understood within a shared framework. It wasn't perfect, but there was at least an expectation that truth mattered, that information had to meet some standard before it was passed on. That expectation is gone. Now education is contested ground. What gets taught, how it's taught, and even whether it should be taught at all, is filtered through ideology. Facts aren't just questioned, they're selected, shaped, or rejected based on alignment. That turns education from a foundation into a filter. And when education becomes a filter, it stops producing understanding. Students aren't being trained to analyze, they're being trained to align, to pick a side early and defend it, to treat information not as something to evaluate, but as something to accept or reject based on identity. That changes the outcome completely. Because a system that teaches people what to think instead of how to think doesn't create independent minds, it creates reinforced narratives. And once those narratives take hold early, they don't get questioned later. That's how the cycle sustains itself. Not by accident, but by design. 9. Psychological stability started breaking down. The human mind needs consistency. It needs some level of stability in how reality works. When that stability disappears, when everything feels contested, uncertain, constantly shifting, the brain doesn't adapt cleanly. It compensates. Some people shut down. They disengage completely because trying to sort through everything feels pointless. Too much contradiction, too much noise, no clear answers, so they step away. Others go the opposite direction. They lock in harder. They grab onto one version of reality and hold onto it tighter than ever, rejecting anything that challenges it. Not because it's proven, but because it feels stable. Both responses create problems. Disengagement removes people from the conversation entirely. Rigidity makes conversation impossible. And what disappears in between? Flexibility. The ability to listen, adjust, reconsider. Without that, there's no path back to shared understanding. 10. The illusion of knowledge locked the system in place. Access to information has never been higher, but understanding hasn't kept up. People can look up anything, find data instantly, pull sources within seconds, but access doesn't equal comprehension. Without context, without verification, without knowing how to evaluate what you're seeing, information becomes fragmented. But it doesn't feel fragmented. It feels like knowledge. And that's where the problem locks in. Because when people feel informed, they stop questioning. They stop checking. They stop looking deeper. They assume they already have what they need. That creates overconfidence. And overconfidence is resistant to correction. So even when better information exists, even when clear evidence is available, it doesn't penetrate. It gets dismissed, ignored, or reinterpreted to fit what's already believed. That's how the system stabilizes in the wrong place. Not through accuracy, but through perceived certainty. 11. Instability became the default state. This system doesn't level out. It doesn't find balance. It escalates. Every fracture increases pressure. Every disagreement widens the gap. Every breakdown in trust feeds into the next one. Nothing resolves, it compounds. That creates a constant state of tension. Not always visible, not always explosive, but always there. Underneath conversations, underneath decisions, underneath how people interact with each other every day. It becomes the default environment. And over time, people adapt to it. They start expecting conflict, assuming bad intent, preparing for disagreement before a conversation even starts. That changes behavior at scale. And once that shift happens, instability isn't a phase. It's the baseline. 12. The damage is structural, not situational. This isn't temporary. It's not something that fades with time or resets with leadership or disappears with one major change. The damage is structural. It exists in how information moves, how people process it, how systems respond to it, and how narratives are formed around it. It's embedded at every level: individual, institutional, cultural. That makes it extremely difficult to reverse. Because you're not fixing one issue, you're trying to realign an entire framework that no longer agrees on its own foundation. And that requires something that no longer exists: shared agreement. Without that, every attempt to fix the system gets interpreted differently, resisted differently, or rejected entirely. Which means the system doesn't correct. It continues. In closing, when reality is lost, everything follows. This is what happens when truth stops being non-negotiable. Not immediate collapse. Not sudden chaos. Something slower. more subtle, but far more permanent. A system where everything still looks like it's functioning, but underneath, nothing is anchored anymore. Because once truth becomes optional, reality becomes unstable. And when reality becomes unstable, everything built on it starts to shift. Trust, law, relationships, governance, identity. All of it. People stop meeting in the middle because there is no middle left. There are only positions. Fixed, defended, isolated. And here is the part that matters most. You don't fix this by adding more information. You don't fix it by arguing louder. You don't fix it by proving anything. Because proof only works in a system that still values truth. That system is gone. What's left is something else. A structure where belief outweighs evidence, where perception overrides reality, where control doesn't require truth, only enough people willing to accept a version of it. That's not temporary. That's a shift. And shifts like this don't reverse cleanly. They redefine everything that comes after. That's the damage. Not loud, not immediate, but absolute, permanent. That's the reality of where things stand. Not disagreement, disconnection. Not confusion, replacement. Truth didn't just get buried. It got downgraded, turned into something optional, something flexible, something people use when it benefits them and ignore when it doesn't. And once that line is crossed, everything else follows. Because if you can't agree on what's real, you can't fix anything built on top of it. Every solution gets rejected before it's even understood. Every conversation turns into a standoff. Every issue becomes permanent. That's not dysfunction. That's a system running exactly the way it's been shaped to run. And the longer it stays like this, the harder it becomes to even recognize what normal used to look like. Next, we go deeper, because this doesn't stop at truth. When reality breaks down, something else fills the gap, and it's not neutral. Episode 3, Control Replaced Freedom. We're going to break down how control doesn't look like control anymore, how it blends in, how it hides behind convenience, safety, and distraction, and how most people don't even see it happening. That's where this is going. That's where we're leaving it. Not because there isn't more, but because now it's on you to actually think about it, to decide whether you're just consuming what's put in front of you, or questioning it. Because if you're not questioning it, someone else is shaping it for you. If this hit, stick around. Because we're not done, not even close. This is the things that bother me. Until next time.